All right, continuing our exploration of the roots of Christian mysticism. It's a book that I've had and I've read through a little bit before, but for some reason it's really come to my attention now, and reading it now makes it more kind of relevant. And I've had some good responses, and I want to get through as much as I can of this book. It's a pretty thick book with pretty dense material, obviously quotes and commentary from the church fathers. It'll depend on your interest. If you're interested, please let me know. I'm going to be kind of moving back and forth from straight readings to these close readings. The close readings will obviously take a little bit longer and probably have to break down the chapters that I do that into different sections. And if you're interested, please, if you can, buy me a cup of coffee. There's a link in the description here. It helps to kind of drive focus as well in terms of what people out there are interested in and what kind of speaks to them. So I don't know exactly how I'm going to structure it, but I'm going to give you an example here, getting into chapter 1 on a kind of close reading. So we're probably just going to get through 3 pages here of chapter 1, which is entitled Quest, Encounter, and Decision. I have a playlist now for this book, and I've read through the preface and the introduction, also read through a portion of another chapter. But I want to start at the beginning here, and the book is outlined kind of like in a narrative and chronologically in terms of the Christian mystic process and perspective. So this initial chapter here, the actual first chapter, talks about the quest, the reason that we follow Christ, and it has to do with the knowledge and therefore the fear of death. Animals don't have knowledge of their death. Humans do, and for the fathers, this is both the problem at the heart of subjectivity, of being a person, of our neurosis, of our alienation, but it is also the solution and a pathway to our salvation. So there's this double-edged to death here. So we're going to look at that, and earlier on we're going to look about regarding metanoia, right? A change of heart, a change in perspective that is necessary to avoid the philautia, to avoid the narcissistic self-love, and to ultimately avoid the zombie apocalypse. He uses a little bit different language here, but that's ultimately kind of what he's saying. We're going to look through the process of going from anguish to wonder, through this process of purification, through this process of ascesis, which is the first kind of step in the praxis section here, the actual practice of purification and coming into the kind of Christian mystic story. And there's a quote, a rather long quote from Hilary of Poitiers, from the book The Trinity, which we'll probably end with just reading that. It's almost like 2 pages, but it's some really profound stuff that I have not come across, at least from this saint here. So let's go. Start from the beginning here. This first paragraph, I want to read it in its entirety here. So it says, human beings are mere scraps of life, here only for an instant. We live in quote-unquote dead life, according to Gregory and Nyssa, in a world permeated by death, in which everything gravitates continually towards nothingness. And this is the root of our ill. For unlike the animals, we know we are going to die. So again, there is the heart of it. We're aware of our death. We are aware that we're naked. We're aware that of our impending death, that we will apparently lose everything that we know and we love. And all personality affects our attempts to, at root, cover up or mitigate or cope with this impending eschatological end of life kind of mode of being that we all find ourselves in as human beings. And then a quote here from St. Augustine to this effect. He says, "Brethren, do our years last? They slip away day by day. Those which were no longer are. Those to come are not yet here. The former are past. The latter will come, only to pass away in their turn. Today exists only in the moment in which we speak. Its first hours have passed. The remainder do not yet exist. They will come, but only to fall into nothingness. Nothing contains constancy itself. The body does not possess the being. It has no permanence. It changes with age, it changes with time and place, it changes with illness and accident. The stars have as little constancy. They change in hidden ways. They go whirling through space. They are not steady. They do not possess being. Nor is the human heart any more constant. How many thoughts disturb it? How many ambitions? How many pleasures draw it this way and that, tearing it apart? The human spirit itself, although endowed with reason, changes. It does not possess being. It wills and does not will. It knows and does not know. It remembers and forgets. No one has in himself the unity of being. After so many sufferings, diseases, troubles, and pains, let us return humbly to that one being. Let us enter into that city whose inhabitants share in being itself. Close quote. So I think what St. Augustine is getting here is that this trying to locate our being within ourselves leads to this philautia, right? Because we come, he says here, it is true that human beings have been eager to achieve unity by themselves, to be their own masters, to depend only on themselves. But that is an adventure like Lucifer's, which leaves us in pure nihilism. That is why metanoia, the great turning around of the mind and heart, and of our whole grasp of reality. So at bottom is this Luciferic impulse to go at it alone, on our own. And as the root of this narcissistic philautia, this narcissistic self-love that is at the heart of the rot of humanity in terms of living in the fallen, dead world. But there's hope. Quote from John Climacus. Hope. He says, the metanoia, the great turning around of the mind and heart and of our whole grasp of reality, is the daughter of hope. It is the renunciation of despair. This is a matter not of mere speculation, but of life or death, of life stronger than death. Quote, for communion with God is life, and separation from God is death. Quote from Augustine, a life without eternity is unworthy of the name of life. Only eternal life is true. I think the idea of eternal life, I think eternity is present in the moment, right? If nothing is that which is constant and constantly changing, the eternal is what we experience in the moment, is what we experience that doesn't pass away. Because the past is already past, the future has not, and the present is passing currently. So ultimately, the eternal life is present and at hand. And I think that through this process of purification, illumination, and deification is about realizing the eternity, the eternal life in the here and now. So let me know what you think about that. More to the text here. That is still true, even though turning to God is generally considered madness these days, even more than it was in the Roman Empire at the peak of its glory. There's a sort of sleep of the soul, and people have to escape death by sleepwalking. Here's the zombie apocalypse metaphor here, right? There's a sleep of the soul, and people have to escape death by sleepwalking or losing themselves in frantic activity. Quote, Abbot Anthony says, a time is coming when people will go mad. And when they meet someone who is not mad, they will turn to him and say, you are out of your mind, just because he is not like them. Close quote. Reminds me currently, right, someone like the Yay, right, the Fool, watch the Fool. Not that this is not about agreeing or disagreeing, it's just watching the person that everybody calls mad collectively. Anguish and despair are not the only starting point. There's also our sense of wonder and the riddle which we perceive in the order of beauty of the world on the one hand, and all the events of history on the other. Through intelligent and beautiful forms of creation, the invisible gives structure and balance to the visible. But the means employed are gravity, death, disintegration. Humanity, likewise, consciously or not, draws from the invisible not only the very idea of justice, but also the high demands of knowledge and art and the possibility of those laws that set a limit to violence and protect friendship. Quote from Gregory Nazianzen: "Who gave you the ability to contemplate the beauty of the skies, the course of the sun, the round moon, the millions of stars, the harmony and rhythm that issue from the world as from a lyre, the return of the seasons, the alternation of the months, the demarcation of day and night, the fruits of the earth, the vastness of the air, the ceaseless motion of the waves, the sound of the wind? Who gave you the rain, the soil to cultivate, food to eat, arts, houses, laws, a republic, cultivated manners, friendship with your fellows?" Close quote. It's a good question to meditate on, not necessarily look for an answer, because I think it's something. I love St. Gregory and Nazianzen. He's kind of one of my favorite fathers, and he's quoted throughout this book. Back to the text here. "Through anguish and wonder, humanity has some inkling of the great depth of divine wisdom. But no full understanding is possible, only a holy fear, a trembling in the face of the immeasurable." Wonder what this means to you, this holy fear and this trembling from your experience. Quote from John Chrysostom: "Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. I praise thee, for thou art fearful and wonderful. There are many things at which we marvel without fear, for example, the beauty of architecture, the masterpieces of painting, or the glory of the human form. We also marvel at the vastness of infinite depth of the sea, but to be above that depth is also terrifying. In the same way, the sacred writer, as he leaned out over the infinite abyss of God's wisdom, was seized with giddiness. Filled with wonder, he drew back, trembling, and said, I praise thee, for thou art fearful and wonderful. Wonderful are thy works, and again, such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high, I cannot attain it." Close quote. Those two quotes from St. Gregory and John Chrysostom here, I think, are beautifully in there. I love how they're juxtaposed here. And it's about not making an idol of your conception of God. It's about living in the mystery. And any conceptual framework that you call God, and knowing God in his essence, it leads to idolatry. So it's this wonder, this openness to the infinite, that is the comportment that is being advised here, I think. We can see the whole process displayed in the life of a certain Hilary of Poitiers, a 4th century Roman-French citizen remarkable for his relevance to ourselves. It's interesting, this quote here from the 4th century, it's a long quote. I think it touches on all the themes that we're dealing with here and now, which I find as a sort of verification of the veracity and the coherence of this mystical worldview. The elite of the declining Roman Empire lived in an intellectual climate very like our own, materialism and skepticism, together with dabblings in synchronistic beliefs. Synchronistic beliefs means all religions are the same, right? We can compare and contrast and integrate all religions. So the New Age is a modern adaptation of these synchronist beliefs, right? So we live within materialism, skepticism, and the New Age. We're resulting in a mixture very different from the ancient religions, talking again about the New Age, which had long ago been rendered obsolete by rationalism and the discovery of the individual. I would say, and this is where in a previous video on Lacan, I made the point that the effects of our psychic and social life are rooted in Descartes, right? It's this reification and deification of rationalism and the discovery of the individual not connected to a group, right, of the cogito, right? In short, what is then true of restricted urban groups is now true of everybody. Hilary quickly took the measure of a society bent upon instant gratification, and driven on by his horror at the prospect of purposelessness and nothingness, set out on the search for the meaning of life. Passing rapidly through stupid materialism and decaying paganism and pseudo-scientific occultism. That's not the big three that we are dealing with here. Again, stupid materialism, scientism, right? Decaying paganism, and pseudo-scientific occultism. He discovered in the biblical teaching of the Jews of the living God who transcends all things, yet is present in them. Outside everything, yet inside. The eccentric center. The author of beauty, disclosed in the beauty of the world. But only the gospel of the Word made flesh, the gospel of the resurrection of the flesh, could assure him that he would not be reduced to non-being, that he, Hilary, was an irreplaceable person and would be wholly loved and saved, body and soul, by the combination of grace and his own freedom. Now begins the long quote. I began the search for the meaning of life. At first I was attracted by riches and leisure, but most people discover that human nature wants something better to do than just gourmandize and kill time. They have been given life in order to achieve something worthwhile, to make use of their talents. It could not have been given to them without some benefit in eternity. How otherwise could one regard as a gift from God a life so eaten away by anguish, so riddled with vexation, which left to itself would simply wear out, from the prattle of the cradle to the drivel of senility? Look at people who have practiced patience, chastity, and forgiveness. The good life for them meant good deeds and good thoughts. Could the immortal God have given us life with no other horizon but death? Could he have inspired us with such a desire to live, if the only outcome would be the horror of death? Then I sought to know God better. Some religions teach that there are different families of deities. They imagine male gods and female ones, and can trace the lineage of these gods born from one another. Other religions teach that there are greater and lesser deities with different attributes. Some claim that there is no God at all and worship nature, which, according to them, came about purely by chance. Most, however, admit that God exists, but hold him to be indifferent to human beings. I was reflecting on these problems when I discovered the books which the Jewish religion says were composed by Moses and the prophets. There I discovered that God bears witness to himself in these terms. Quote, I am who I am, and say this to me, say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. I was filled with wonder at this perfect definition which translates into intelligible words the incomprehensible knowledge of God. Nothing better suggests God than being. Quote, he who is can have neither end nor beginning. And since God's eternity cannot contradict itself, in order to assert his unapproachable eternity, God needed only to assert solemnly that he is. But it was necessary also to recognize God's work. Quote, who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand and marked off the heavens with a span. Close quote. And later, quote, heaven is my throne and the earth is my footstool. All these things my hand has made. The whole heavens are held in God's hand, the whole earth in the hollow of his hand. The heaven is also his throne, and the earth is his footstool. We should certainly avoid too human an image of God, as someone sitting on a throne with his feet on a footstool. His throne and footstool are his infinite omnipotence, which embraces everything in the hollow of his hand. The imagery borrowed from created things signifies that God exists in them and outside them, that he both transcends and pervades them, that he surpasses all creatures and yet dwells in them. The hollow of his hand symbolizes the power of his divinity revealing itself. Think about that. in terms of revealing itself. I think it's a beautiful picture here. The throne and the footstool show how he controls external objects because he is with them, but at the same time he envelops them and encloses them within himself. He is inside and outside everything. Nothing is beyond the reach of the one who is infinite. What came to light as a result of my search was well expressed by the prophet. Quote, "Whither shall I go from thy spirit? Or whither shall I flee from thy presence? If I ascend to heaven, thou art there. If I make my bed in Sheol, thou art there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there thy hand shall lead me, and thy hand and thy right hand shall hold me." There's no place without God. Place does not exist except in God. Place does not exist except in God. I was happy contemplating the mystery of his wisdom and his unapproachableness. I worshiped the eternity and immeasurable greatness of my Father and Creator. But I longed also to behold the beauty of my Lord. My ardor, deceived by the weakness of my mind, was trapped in its own search when I discovered in the words of the prophet this magnificent thought about God. Quote, "For from the greatness and beauty of created things comes a corresponding perception of their Creator." Close quote. The sky and the air are beautiful, the earth and the seas are beautiful. By divine grace, the universe was called by the Greeks cosmos, meaning ornament. Surely the author of all created beauty must himself be the beauty in all beauty. But if we are blessed with an intuition of God, what shall we gain from it if death does away with all feeling and puts an irrevocable end to a weary existence? My mind was bewildered, trembling for itself and for its body. It was troubled at its fate and that of the body in which it was dwelling when, following on from the law and the prophets, I made the acquaintance of the teaching of the gospel and the apostles. Quote, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The true light that enlightens every man was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world knew him not. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, full of grace and truth. We've beheld his glory, glory as the only Son from the Father." Close quote, obviously from John. My intellect overstepped its limits at that point, and I learned more about God than I had expected. I understood that my Creator was God, born of God. I learned that the Word was God and was with him from the beginning. I came to know the light of the world. I understood that the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. Those who welcomed him became children of God by a birth not in the flesh, but in faith. This gift of God is offered to everyone. We can receive it because of our freedom, which was given us expressly for this purpose. But this very power given to each person to be a child of God was bogged down in weak and hesitant faith. Our own difficulties make hope painful. Our desire becomes infuriating, and our faith grows weak. That is why the Word was made flesh. By means of the Word made flesh, the flesh was enabled to raise itself up to the Word. Without surrendering his divinity, God was made of our flesh. My soul joyfully received the revelation of this mystery. By means of my flesh, I was drawing near to God. By means of my faith, I was called to a new birth. I was able to receive this new birth from on high. I was assured that I could not be reduced to non-being. Close quote. God is absolute beauty because he is absolute personal existence. As such, he awakens our desire, sets it free, and draws it to himself. He sets beings within their limits, but he calls them into communion with one another without confusing them. Being himself beyond movement or rest, he gives to each creature an identity that is exact and distinct, but is nevertheless capable of development when brought to life by the dynamic powers of love. And I'll leave it here with this final quote from Dionysius the Areopagite. God is beauty. This beauty is the source of all friendship and all mutual understanding. It is this beauty which moves all living things and preserves them whilst filling them with love and desire for their own particular sort of beauty. For each one, therefore, beauty is both its limit and the object of its love, since it is its goal and its model, for it is by its likeness to this beauty that everything is defined. Thus, true beauty and goodness are mixed together because, whatever the force may be that moves living things, it tends always towards beauty and goodness, and there is nothing that does not have a share in beauty and goodness. By virtue of this reality, all creatures subsist united and separate, identical and opposite, alike and unlike. Alike and unlike, contraries are united, and the united elements are not confused. By virtue of beauty and goodness, everything is in communion with everything else, each in its own way. Creatures love one another without losing themselves in one another. Everything is in harmony. Parts fit snugly into the whole. One generation succeeds another. Spirits, souls, and bodies remain at the same time steady and mobile, because for all of them beauty and goodness is at once repose and movement, being itself beyond both. Close quote. I'll leave it there. Thanks for listening.